What's the state of your website? If you're looking for a new digital experience platform, or DXP, to run your digital experiences, I have the book for you. The Agile Brand Guide to Digital Experience Platforms is part of my best-selling series of MarTech books. In this book, I explore and demystify DXPs and look at the roles a digital experience platform should play, the different types on the market, as well as how to initially evaluate platforms, then how to best implement a DXP once you've selected it. The book also features a foreword from Rupali Jain, Chief Product Officer at leading DXP provider Optimizely, as well as several other thought leaders in the industry. Learn more and get a copy in print or digital now by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com.
The Agile Brand.
Welcome to Season 6 of the Agile Brand, where we discuss marketing technology and customer experience trends, insights, and ideas with enterprise and technology platform leaders. We focus on the people, processes, data, and platforms that make brands successful, scalable, customer-focused, and sustainable. This is what makes an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advising Fortune 1000 brands on MarTech, marketing operations, and CX, best-selling author and speaker. The Agile Brand Podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. Now let's get on to the show. You've likely heard us talk about composable approaches a bit on this show. Today we're going to talk about what it looks like to take a composable approach with a customer data platform with Kyle Martinowich, Senior Partnership Lead at GrowthLoop. He's going to share insights on the power of composable CDPs and how they are reshaping businesses' approach to data segmentation and customer relationship management. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. Very excited to be here.
Yeah. Looking forward to talking about this with you. Yeah, as I said, we talk about composable plenty. I don't know that we've really talked about composable and CDPs. So this is looking forward to this conversation. So before we dive in, though, why don't you give us an overview of your role at GrowthLoop and how you've come to focus on this area of composable CDPs?
Great, thanks. So today I run the relationship between GrowthLoop and Snowflake. GrowthLoop being the composable CDP and Snowflake being one of the premier data warehouses in the US today. My job is to help the Snowflake team and our joint customers understand the value and the reason why marketers today find a composable CDP something that they need in their tool stack versus how they used to go about doing marketing automation previously.
Yeah. Great. Well, yeah, let's dive in here, and we're going to start with just kind of understanding the shift from traditional, CDPs. It's funny, they've been around for a while. I know the Gartner quadrant just came out kind of 11 years after the fact, but been around, so probably long enough to say traditional CDPs exist. So, talking about this shift from traditional to composable CDPs, first, can you explain the core differences between, what is a traditional CDP and what's a composable CDP, and what are limitations of a traditional approach versus what composable brings to the table?
Absolutely. So, a traditional CDP is something where consumption and data lives inside of the SaaS tool itself. So probably around 7 to 10 years ago, the beginnings of what was a customer data platform started to come up. I think I was at Oracle at the time. Their first tool called Unity was one of the first to the market. You had other tools out there like Treasure Data, Action IQ, and Parity, who were just starting to build SaaS platforms that were going to allow marketers to ingest different streams of data and create what some people call the golden record or the customer 360. And what I mean by that is you would take stuff like transactional databases that were traditionally in a warehouse and combine them with marketing data such as event click stream from email, from web analytics, from e-commerce purchases, also mobile application data, and put those into these traditional CDPs or SaaS applications which would then combine them and allow a marketer to get a single view of the customer. That was the original purpose of the traditional CDP, which was to get a single view of the customer. Transition to around 5 years into that growth period for CDPs, for customer data platforms. And what happened is that the tools, these traditional CDPs, were not able to handle the breadth of the data that these businesses were starting to collect on their consumers. So you were starting to find challenges where the marketing automation tools and the CDPs were not able to take in the amount of event stream data around the customer and process it without incurring extremely high costs to the business. And so this is where the composable architecture started to come in, where you would look at your data warehouse, whether in my case, I work alongside Snowflake, but we have partnerships with AWS Redshift, with Google BigQuery, and you're able to now start taking that data, the data that I described around the customer 360, and bringing that into the warehouse. And there are no limitations in the data warehouse to how much you can bring in. Then we were able to bring tools that would not take that data out of the warehouse and put them on top of the warehouse in the composable fashion. So that's what GrowthLoop was built for. So this is a NoSQL activation layer and segmentation layer that can utilize that full breadth of that customer 360 inside of the warehouse without having to move data out of the warehouse, out of the SaaS marketing automation tools, and into these traditional CDPs.
Yeah, and so you kind of touched on this, but just to kind of underscore here. So obviously a lot's changed in the last 5 years, 6 years, let alone 5 months. These days, there's scaling issues. There's increased amounts of channels that marketers need to deal with. There's greater diversity of data. So, you talked about kind of the benefits of composable to an extent here, but is scaling and data diversity, like how do composable CDPs stack up to those traditional ones in terms of that?
I think scalability is outside of privacy. Those are the two things that are most important to an organization today. And so we'll take scalability and how important that is. I think that consumers are starting to interact with businesses in pretty much every possible touch point that us as marketers and us as consumer experience individuals think about. So that could be call centers, mobile application chatbots, websites, purchasing on in-store if it's possible for retailers. So there are just a variety of touch points that now you are communicating with your consumers or with your customers. And all of that data needs to be combined in a location that accepts that much data. And traditionally, the CDPs that were built first just weren't built. They weren't data warehouses. They're not built for that much scale in the amount of consumer data and touch points that are necessary to actually meet the consumer where they want to be communicated to at the time of their purchase or the time of their unhappiness or happiness with you as a business.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good segue to, step one is collecting the data, storing it in the right ways, making it accessible. And then, the next thing is, well, what do we do with it? You touched on meeting customers where they are and fulfilling their needs. And so, this leads to talking about how a composable CDP works through like marketing ops and data teams. So how should marketing teams look at a composable CDP in terms of delivering that hyper personalized one-to-one omni-channel, it's buzzword bingo, I know, but like delivering all those things that customers are increasingly expecting?
I think that the blending of the new CMO as the data-driven CMO is helping accelerate this conversation. I think
Yeah.
there used to be a dichotomy between engineering and marketing that caused friction, but I believe that time, those barriers to entry are starting to fall quickly. We see most of our CMOs who are now hiring data-driven marketing analytics or consumer insights teams to help bridge the gap between the IT traditional usage of data, which would just be warehouse, and then actually using that data for activation and for personalization use cases.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say, and I think that the way that businesses really start to take off and utilize this composable structure is by actually defining the use cases first and then analyzing the data that's necessary to produce that use case. If you'd like me to give an example, I can.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. So we used to always talk about cart abandonment. That used to be like the number one thing that we heard from retailers. But I think that is a simple use case. Now, if we get to a use case more where marketers are now starting to build multi-channel journeys, right? That's a big thing, journey orchestration. To run a multi-channel orchestration campaign for a cohort of customers, you are going to need to look at a variety of different data points within your database. And so if we say now a cart abandonment program, that can be now not just an email after they had abandoned the cart. It could be a text message. It could be an in-app SMS. It could be a bunch of Facebook ads. It could be a variety of different touch points upon which you may interact with your customer. And once you've decided that that's the journey you want to put them on, you need to reverse engineer all of the data points. So you need to go down and say, okay, I need data out of Google Analytics. I need data out of Twilio. I need data out of our e-commerce platform like a Magento or something like that. And once you've defined the pieces of those data that you need, that's where marketers can now go to their IT counterparts and say, hey, these are the tables and transactions that I need to be putting into my warehouse so that I can build a proper customer 360. And I do believe that it starts on the top level business objective, whether that's acquiring new customers, retaining existing customers, upsell or cross sell. Once you've decided on those, you can start to figure out where the underlying data lives, and where you need it to be able to be performant in those use cases.
Yeah. I love that focus on defining the use case first versus, because there's a lot of things that can be done, but should they be done, and all that. You briefly touched earlier on data privacy and stuff, and I wanted to just get to that real quick here, as far as how does a composable platform facilitate things like data governance, compliance, obviously regulations. Any company operating internationally is dealing with multiple regulations. How does a composable CDP operate there?
I think very simply, a composable CDP is a query in place application. So the data that a company owns that may have PII or PHI in these regulated industries like healthcare, financial services, and even base consumer data needs to be regulated this day with CCPA and other regulations that are out there. I think it's important that once a company makes a decision to put their time and effort into building a customer 360 inside of a data warehouse like the ones we mentioned before, the movement of that data out to other SaaS tools like an email tool, an SMS tool, a web personalization tool, that creates the opportunity for situations to go awry for the business, whether that leaves it open to PII leaking out or data living in an S3 bucket that should not be there, and people being able to come in and access that data. So I think by building the customer 360 in the warehouse and using a query in place composable architecture for CDP, you eliminate any of the data privacy issues. You completely now have decided to govern the data in which the way that the business wants, who has access to what tables, who has access to what PII. And that right there starts to, build up the muscle internally at these companies of the importance of this composable structure versus, every day or every hour shipping data to these downstream destination tools or upstream destination tools, depending on what you're doing with your data.
As a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the ad space can be. If your message isn't targeted to the right audience, it just disappears into the noise. With LinkedIn ads, you can precisely reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. With LinkedIn's targeting capabilities, you can reach them by job title, industry, company, and more. Stand out with LinkedIn ads and start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. LinkedIn ads allows you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. You'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers, 1 billion members, 130 million decision makers, and 10 million C-level executives. You'll be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B. In technology, LinkedIn generated 2 to 5 times higher return on ad spend than other social media platforms. You'll work with a partner who respects the B2B world you operate in. 79% of B2B content marketers said LinkedIn produces the best results for paid media. And I know from firsthand experience. LinkedIn is where I go to learn about the latest happenings in my industry, network with peers, and share my own insights. It's been a critical component of how I stay informed to make better decisions. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/agile to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/agile. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be. As a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the ad space can be. If your message isn't targeted to the right audience, it just disappears into the noise. With LinkedIn ads, you can precisely reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. With LinkedIn's targeting capabilities, you can reach them by job title, industry, company, and more. Stand out with LinkedIn ads and start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. LinkedIn ads allows you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. You'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers, 1 billion members, 130 million decision makers, and 10 million C-level executives. You'll be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B. In technology, LinkedIn generated 2 to 5 times higher return on ad spend than other social media platforms. You'll work with a partner who respects the B2B world you operate in. 79% of B2B content marketers said LinkedIn produces the best results for paid media. And I know from firsthand experience. LinkedIn is where I go to learn about the latest happenings in my industry, network with peers, and share my own insights. It's been a critical component of how I stay informed to make better decisions. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/agile to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/agile. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be. So, we've talked about a lot of the benefits of a composable CDP and what it allows, but obviously there's some integration that needs to get done to do this. You touched on some of those things as far as thinking ahead of use cases and everything. But what are some common challenges that businesses face, or even some things to think they need to think through when integrating composable CDPs into an existing data infrastructure?
I think the first thing that every business should look at is why they have decided that the composable architecture is right or wrong for them. I never think it's wrong, and that's just my opinion. But some companies might have a different idea. So I think that they need to make a decision internally whether a composable architecture is going to be something that is right or wrong for them. And the reason I say that is because depending on where you are as a business and where you're headed as a business, those things can make a determination if this is the right or wrong time for you to take that action. For example, you talked about ingestion. Ingesting data can be easy and it can be hard, depending on the tools that you are already working with. For example, we work with partners like Braze and Iterable. They have done a great job in moving towards this composable architecture framework with these clouds. They now have things like data sharing, where you're able to move some of that data in between these applications without having to push it into, say, an API and then into a standard bucket and then move it into the warehouse. Now they have just native application sharing within some of these warehouses. So I think the warehouses plus the tools for data activation, your email, your SMS tools, they have already started to understand the importance of data sharing without having to move data from an ingestion and an activation standpoint. So I think that's a great movement in the market and a clear sign that composability is correct. Yeah. And then the last thing is the NoSQL use of getting the data or understanding what's happening inside of the data. There's something called the SQL crazy train that we have heard many, many times, which is a marketer wanting data and not knowing how to write SQL and having to put out a Trello ticket or a Jira ticket to get a count of the data. And that in itself should be one of the deciding factors. How much people, process, and technology are we able to reduce by going to this type of framework?
Yeah. Well, and because at the end of the day, there's lots of things that marketers are responsible for, but the responsibility of a CDP is to really provide that and maintain that unified customer profile. So, kind of building on what you were just saying, what should marketers be keeping in mind to, make sure that end goal of that unified customer profile is always kind of top of mind?
I think they should start with their business objectives. Again, I'm going to go back to the use cases and business objectives. I think that there are certain KPIs that all businesses that we interact with, Greg, are focused on. And I think that it usually starts with ROAS and CAC, and then it falls its way through CLTV, CSAT, and NPS for some of your more high-tech types of businesses. So I think that as long as the companies that are looking to move to the composable architecture understand the net positive effects that it's going to bring, not only for operational efficiency within the business, but related to their KPIs for acquisition on things like ROAS. And I'm going to give an example here. And one of the best things that I think about composable CDP for acquisition marketers is your ability to have access to the customer 360 so that you can develop really tight seed audiences to the walled gardens. The change that happened in the last 3 to 5 years with the walled gardens only accepting seed audiences for lookalikes, I think is really going to start pushing even more marketers to go to this composable architecture, because to have the breadth of the data to understand what is an applicable customer so that you can go and retarget them on these walled gardens with very limited information about who you're actually targeting is super key and very important today.
Yeah. And so you touched on this a little bit earlier as far as the, marketers out there I know are familiar with the dynamics between IT or data or IT and data and the marketing department. Can you talk a little bit more about, how does this change in terms of, when you start moving to a composable approach, and particularly with the customer data platform, but, when you start moving to this approach, what kind of changes and what should marketing teams be keeping in mind in terms of these changes?
I think it's time to our lead to campaign. That's the biggest change right there. I think that we've seen cases where a marketer requests data from their marketing teams and even in the CDP, and it's still taking 3 to 5 business days. In the world that we live in, with the amount of behavioral and firmographic changes that happen on a customer record, 3 to 5 days to run a journey or to get a campaign out the door is, in my opinion, just is faulty at this point, right? I think we're almost to the point where in my opinion, the future will be LLMs driving the journey, and they'll be looking at real-time data, your activities, your behaviors in real time, and then deciding on what channel and what communication that you're getting. So I think that the faster that companies move to a composable architecture, they'll have access to the breadth of the data, and it'll increase the speed upon which they are able to appropriately communicate with their customers, get their campaigns and their cohorts into the right journeys, so that they're improving those KPIs that I talked about just a minute ago.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one last thing I wanted to talk about with you is looking ahead to the future, and future of composable CDPs. What's next from what you're seeing? How do you see composable CDPs evolving? And as again, nothing seems to be getting any less complicated out there for marketers to need to deal with. But how do you see composable CDPs kind of evolving to match this?
I think today the big focus is on the ability to create audience cohorts. Right now, no code, be able to utilize your data to create those great segments so that you can go market to them. I think the rise of Gen AI is going to remove audiences almost altogether. I think instead of having 20 audiences of 50,000 in each cohort, we're going to go to 10 million individualized journeys. I think the companies that are fast to get their data into these warehouses, get that base customer table, that golden record ready, the LLMs are going to be good enough to then decide that everybody's going to have their own journey, and that's going to be able to match that journey against people who look like that, previous campaigns, previous journeys that had happened in the past. And I think we're going to go away from cohorts and go to an audience of one, and go to hyper-personalization from the journey perspective. I truly believe that. I think that as compute costs come down, data enters the warehouse, the next logical step would be to activate those journeys one-to-one, personalized out of the warehouse.
Yeah. I love that you're saying that, because I completely agree with that. I think that's, as neat as Chat GPT and some other Gen AI things are. It's like what I get really excited about is that we've been talking about one-to-one personalization for, I feel like it's been decades, but maybe at least a decade or so. We've been talking about personalization, hyper-personalization, but yeah, it does feel like we're on the cusp of something really interesting. And personas and cohorts and the things that you mentioned, they always seem to fall a little bit flat when it comes to using them in real life. So yeah,
you can always tell that it's not working when they have to do A/B tests and holdouts and splits, right? If you have to do that, then you're not 100% sure. So that's
totally.
why the one-to-one I agree with you on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kyle, thanks so much for joining today. What's a key takeaway that you hope our listeners will remember about what we talked about today about composable CDPs and customer data management?
I think the number one thing is all marketers and anyone thinking about composable CDP should, again, start with a use case workshop internally and decide on what are the key KPIs, metrics, and campaigns that are necessary for me to excel in my part of the business, and then what is the data that's necessary to run those campaigns. And I think if people start there, their outcomes will be better when transitioning to a composable architecture.
Yeah, love it. Well, again, I'd like to thank Kyle Martinowich, Senior Partnership Lead at GrowthLoop, for joining us today and sharing his expertise on customer data platforms. Thanks again for listening to The Agile Brand, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkillstrom.com. That's GregKihlstrom.com. While you're there, check out my series of best-selling Agile Brand guides covering a wide variety of marketing technology topics, or you can search for Greg Kihlstrom on Amazon. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.
The Agile brand.